Okay, so in this video, we're actually going to talk about how do you get sample data inside of a SharePoint list. As we know that working with SharePoint over time, some of those custom solutions that we implement within SharePoint, they're performing well on day one of the release, but then over time, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years later, you start to run into performance issues. You start to run into errors or threshold errors, and that's just because the company or the organization is using SharePoint and adding data on top of data, and maybe there's no archive information policy or anything like that in place to keep purging the data. So what we want to do is to ensure that during the development process, we have enough data to work with, not only to do pressure tests against a custom solution, but also have enough data for search capabilities and paging features and capabilities that we need to write during the development process and not have to enter that in all of that in by hand. So as you can see, as in the last video, we talked about the featured jobs here, which is located here, and all these jobs are coming from that job custom list that I've created in the past. So if we take a closer look at this list, as of now, as I mentioned before, this was targeted to load the 100,000 items. Those 100,000 items are there. So now if you look in this job posting list, you have all that data there, and of course I did not enter this in by hand. I used a data generator, and the data generator I used is called Macaru. So let's take a quick review of this schema, especially if you're just picking up this video for the first time and you're not following along with the series. Let's just quickly walk through the schema of the data. So this is a job posting. It has a list of postings for jobs. And within there, we have a created date that's out of the box, so we didn't create that. The department, the experience is active, feature description, title, summary, and all this other good stuff. And you also have different choice site column types. So the experience is a finite list of experiences 1 through 15 years. And then you also have another choice column for locations. We don't want these to be any location in the world. We want to have these finite within these select 10 or 12, wherever the count is for the different locations. So not only are we just generating random data, there's also randomization within a finite list of data that we want to display. And then finally, we have another site column type, which is the publishing image, and we'll talk through how do we get that into a SharePoint list from that random data set. So let's take a closer look at Macaru. So Macaru is an online service that you can subscribe to. I have the mid-tier. There's a free account and then there's a mid-tier account. I have the mid-tier account, and basically you get all the same capabilities between the tiers. It depends on how many rows of data you can download within a single download instance. So the free account allows you to download 1,000. I don't think there is a cap, so I think you just have to download 1,000 100 times in order to get 100,000 items, which it motivated me to go to the mid-tier account, which I can download 100,000 items at a time. So I just have to download that 10 times in order to get 1 million records. Okay, so if you look at this mapping here, basically what this is going to do is to allow you to pick different field names, and you can customize these, and then basically a data type for that field. So if you take a look at the job title, if you click into this guy, let's find it here. I'm going to do a quick search on the different column types, and you look at the job title. Oops, sorry. It shows you the different titles, right? And this can be across any industry. And I think I haven't taken a closer look at the data because really all I need is the content per se, not necessarily. I'm not that interested in, is this the right, for the right field? Are these the right titles and all this other good stuff? But I think those do line up. But if you just browse this, right, and look at the personal data type category, you will see all the different data options if you were going to create like a personal record or a person record. So you know, race, language, and all this other good stuff, different names, different full names, first names and genders and all this other good stuff. So, you know, you have a lot of capabilities and flexibilities with the type of name. So not only are you able to get the pressure of the amount of data, you can have data that's actually relevant and relatable. So, that's going to be the same for each one of these different types, right? So I think you kind of get that as far as like sentences, it's just the amount of data that's in the sentence structure, the same with paragraphs. And then here you can pick a range as this thing is randomizing, how many sentences you want for the summary, how many paragraphs, obviously we want a lot more text for that description section. But then the interesting piece really comes into the custom list. So as I mentioned for the location, we don't want all those different cities and provinces or whatever across worldwide. We actually want to limit those down to a finite list. And this is where you just specify a custom comma delimited list, and you select the randomizer button, and that will randomize within that list for each record that it generates. And also I use that same trick for the image. So basically what I've done, I went through, and let's just take a closer look at this. I went through the images library and extracted all the URLs for, I think it was like 10 or 12 images, and just basically made a comma delimited list for each one of those URLs, dropped that into the random generator, and now I have random images, publishing images that live in the images library within SharePoint, part of my random data set. And I did the same thing for experience and salary, because these are choice columns. So basically I went through each one of those choice columns, select all for all the options in the choice, drop them in the notepad, comma delimit those, and then drop them in here. So now it generates a finite list based on the custom list that I am specifying. So once you kind of get all these fields in here, and obviously you can name these fields whatever you want. They don't have to exactly match what you have in the site column, because in the CSOM code, which I'm going to show you here in a bit, you would do a mapping exercise that kind of takes like image URL and then drop that into our publishing image site column, the summary property of the object, JSON object, and then drop that into the summary site column that we specify in the postings list. All right, so let's take a quick preview of what this JSON looks like. And, it's good to do a preview so that way you can ensure that you're getting what you expect. And this is just, as we mentioned, these are my publishing images here. There's your department. There's your summary. You can kind of get a sense of how that looks. Your description, that one has one paragraph. Some of them have several paragraphs. So, once you start to look at this random data within the SharePoint list, you get a nice filled out job posting entry that kind of looks and feel like Content Manager will eventually use this system for in order to enter in the job information. Okay, so that's the way that you can preview that, and now we're ready to download the data. And as I mentioned, I'm selecting 1,000 here, so let's just do 1,000 -1, and basically that would just save that off, and you can just take a look at this in any JSON editor. And I think in my scenario it's just going to be Visual Studio. All right, so as this guy pops up in Studio, still reading it in, it's only 1,000 items. Or did I select the one with 100,000? All right. So this is just a standard JSON object form, with array of objects in the standard JSON format, and you should be able to read this in as you would with any other JSON file, right? So that's that. Now let's take a quick look at the CSOM code that I use to map this data in. So this is going to look at this path here in order to pick up that JSON file. It's going to stream it in. I'm actually doing some things here. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail. We're just going to brush through the C# code, because actually I want to focus on the random data generating, how we're doing the mapping. And then in the next video, we'll talk through all the different options with how to code this, and actually take a closer look on how you actually will develop this type of import. So here I have a service or a data manager that I created, custom data manager here. That's going to get my SharePoint context. Again, this is all CSOM. This reads in the JSON file, streams it in, and loads all that into memory. So now I have the JSON in memory. I use that manager to go which now I have a hook to SharePoint, and I get the SharePoint posting list. And then from there, I have this custom model, right? This job item model, to where I'm mapping all that JSON into that model, which is, it's just a little bit cleaner code. It just allows you to do a lot of IntelliSense as I'm kind of working with those test data items within this code. For testing purposes, as is highlighted here, I have potentially I have 100,000 items. I know the sample we downloaded was only 1,000, but I think this guy here, this real JP posting, is 100,000 item. I want to do a test sample, right? So this can be 10 or 100, whatever. So for testing purposes only, I'm only going to take the first 100. This line here, you actually see me playing around with the different method types as I look at how different ways that we can optimize the CSOM code. Because as you will find out in the next video, CSOM code is going to be a lot slower than full trust code, and just that's the nature of the beast, right? Because each request that you make with the CSOM execute query is a web request, versus where we're doing like updates and things like that. With full trust code, it was a direct line or direct connection to the underlying API, which was connected to the database to store that. So you're talking, a fraction of a millisecond versus several milliseconds when we're dealing with CSOM. So in these three different methods, we're going to talk in the next video, how do you optimize that in order to get the best performance, because you have that network latency, because we are making service requests across the wire. So for this one here, we're doing something very simple. We're just going to take it straight up, single thread, one item at a time, and it's not asynchronous, it's synchronous, and we're really just going to do something very simple to get the job done. This is probably the slowest way to do that, and we'll talk about that in the next video on how to optimize that. So more to come in the next video. But as far as mapping, this is passing in that JSON collection of this is your test data, this is your SharePoint list, and from that SharePoint list, you need to add an item, and then for each item, that's where we do our mapping. This mapping, because we're dealing with very simple columns, right? I mean, it's single line, multi-line, choice, yes, no. So these are very simple columns, with the exception of the publishing site column here for the JP image. That one, we have to do a little manipulation. Basically, standard image tag, you load in that image URL from your test data, set that as the source attribute, and then this gives us an opportunity to set the rendition ID to 1, which, if you take a quick look, gives us the nice pretty thumbnail that we see right here, not only in the display item view, but also in the list view when we're seeing all of these job postings in the list, right? Somehow you skipped way past that. Okay, real quickly. So this guy here. So that image rendition 1 was given that nice crop thumbnail to be appear here. But as we talked about in the previous video, because of the way that we do our extraction of the publishing image, we're able to define and redefine that rendition ID here to get things nice and neat, nice and uniform, and then working as expected and actually perfectly within a responsive design. So again, that's publishing date. We do an update, and then we do an execute query. And if we execute this, and I think I have this going into my test job posting list, you will see that this guy will kind of drip through and add these items one at a time, safely, synchronous, and it's just doing its thing, very slow and steady, right? So this is going to take, and this is, we only did the top 100, so this may take a little bit. We're not going to wait for it. All right, so let's just kill it. But then if you look at, again, just a sneak peek into what we're going to do in the next video, this one does things in batches. And if you look at the difference in performance, I think this does it in batches of 50. So basically, it adds 50, does an execute query, add another 50, does an execute query, and it's done. 10 seconds, you're done, right? So we watch that thing go through 10 seconds with a single thread, single item. 10 seconds, I think we probably got 10 in there, 30 maybe. But, in 10 seconds with the batches, we can do it all 100, right? So when you're dealing with 100,000 items, performance becomes a very key factor, especially depending on how you're going to be executing or running these jobs. And how do we do that and how do we code for that is going to be something to come in the next video. So that's it. I mean, Macaru is the tool that I use, but like I say, do a Google search out there. There are other random data generators. I think the key is just to make sure that you have a custom list field to where you can specify those finite lists of custom data attributes that you want to map to. Make sure you have a nice variety of data elements that you can kind of load in and just get a sufficient amount of data. I think 100,000 or maybe a million is good, but usually if you solve the performance issue for 100,000 going up to a million, you're not going to, is those same techniques should work. I don't think you're going to do anything different code wise for 100,000 versus a million, because you're always going to be dealing with things in batches and paging through it and make sure that your indexes are in place. So I think 100,000 is a great number to work with. And then you just kind of go from there. So that's it for this video. Again, I just wanted to walk through how do you get random test data into a SharePoint list to kind of help you out during the development phase. In the next video, we're actually going to go through this C# code in depth and talk about the different nuances with CSOM, and especially coming from full trust code with a lot of these things we didn't have to consider or have to take into consideration, and things just performed well by default. Memory was the only main thing that we were concerned with, but here we have this latency because this service calls, and there's a lot of key things that you have to do. All right, so I'll catch you in the next video, and until then, take care.